As we've seen from the last episode, the words Tyrrheni and Terseni are often used alongside the term Pelasgian, which also suggests a connection between the two. An example of this is Thucydides, who refers to Tyrrheno-Pelasgians in his work Peloponnesian War, where he states, quote, "But the greater number are Tyrrheno-Pelasgians, once settled in Lemnos." End quote. This sentiment seems to be shared by Sophocles, who also refers to Tyrrheni-Pelasgians in a fragment which we find quoted by Dionysius of Halicarnassus. Quote, "O fair flowing Inachus of ocean begot, that sire of all waters, thou rulest with might over the Argive fields and Heras hills, and Tyrrheni-Pelasgians also." End quote. Hellanicus of Lesbos also tells us, once again in a fragment which is relayed by Dionysius, that the Tyrrhenians were once known as Pelasgians. Quote, Hellanicus of Lesbos says that the Tyrrhenians, who were previously called Pelasgians, received their present name after they had settled in Italy. These are his words in the Phoronis. Phrastor was the son of Pelasgus, their king, and Menippe the daughter of Peneus. His son was Amuntor, Amuntor's son was Teutomedes, and the latter's son was Nanas. In his reign, the Pelasgians were driven out of their country by the Greeks, and after leaving their ships on the river Spines in the Ionian Sea, they took Croton, an inland city, and proceeding from there, they colonised the country now called Tyrrhenia. End quote. Some sources say that the Tyrrhenians took their name from Tyrrhenus, the son of Attis, who led a colony out of Lydia to Italy due to a famine which was plaguing his people. Here is what Herodotus has to say on the subject in his work Histories. Quote, "In the reign of Attis, son of Manes, there was a great scarcity of food in all Lydia. For a while the Lydians bore this with what patience they could. Presently, when the famine did not abate, they looked for remedies. But the famine did not cease to trouble them, and instead afflicted them even more. At last their king divided the people into two groups, and made them draw lots, so that the one group should remain and the other should leave the country. He himself was to be the head of those who drew the lot to remain there, and his son, whose name was Tyrrhenus, of those who departed. Then the one group, having drawn the lot, left the country and came down to Smyrna to build ships, in which they loaded all their goods that could be transported aboard ship, and sailed away to seek a livelihood and a country. Until at last, after sojourning with one people after another, they came to the Ombrici, where they founded cities and have lived ever since. They no longer call themselves Lydians, but Tyrrhenians, after the name of the king's son who had led them there." End quote. What's interesting about this quote is the mention of the Tyrrhenians heading to Smyrna in order to build ships. The archaeological record indicates that the earliest settlement of Old Smyrna was by Aeolians around the 11th century BC. These Aeolians were said to have originated in Thessaly and supposedly took their name from Aeolus, the son of Hellene, and Herodotus tells us that the Aeolians were originally Pelasgians. Quote, "The Aeolians furnished 60 ships and were equipped like Greeks. Formerly they were called Pelasgian, as the Greek story goes." End quote. In geography, Strabo cites Anticyclodes, who states that the Pelasgians first colonised two islands off the coast of Asia Minor, Lemnos and Imbros. He then goes on to say that a number of these Pelasgians then moved to Italy with Tyrrhenus, the son of Attis. Quote, "Anticyclodes says that they first colonised about Lemnos and Imbros, and that some of their number passed into Italy with Tyrrhenus, the son of Attis." End quote. This notion regarding the Pelasgians colonising the islands of Lemnos and Imbros is seemingly corroborated by Herodotus, who says, quote, Lemnos and Imbros, which were both at that time still inhabited by Pelasgians, end quote. Strabo also says that the group who moved to Italy with Tyrrhenus became known as Tyrrhenians by the Greeks, who in turn would later become known as Etruscans and Tuscans by the Romans. Quote, the Tyrrheni have now received from the Romans the surname of Etrusci and Tusci. The Greeks thus named them from Tyrrhenus, the son of Attis, as they say, who sent hither a colony from Lydia. End quote. This is interesting, as Strabo also tells us that the region of Purgi, most well known for its Etruscan town, port and religious sanctuary, was originally founded by the Pelasgians and was dedicated to the Greek goddess Aletheia. In addition to this, Strabo also tells us that between the regions of Kosai and Gravisci, which was a relatively short distance from Tarquinia, was the location of the royal residence of Malleus, the Pelasgian. Quote, between them is the place named Regis Villa. This is said to have been the royal residence of Malleus the Pelasgian. These were of the same tribe as those who occupied Agula. From Gravisci to Purgi is a little less than 180 stadia. Purgi contains a sanctuary of Aletheia, founded by the Pelasgi. End quote. To hear more about the Etruscan site at Purgi, you can check out one of my earlier videos here. Not everyone was in agreement, however, that the Tyrrhenians and Pelasgians were one and the same people. Dionysius of Halicarnassus discusses his thoughts on them being separate groups, and this notion is also agreed upon by some of the other sources. Virgil in the Aeneid certainly refers to them as separate people. Quote, the tale is that the ancient Pelasgians, who once held the Latin borders, dedicated this wood and a festive day to Silvanus, god of the fields and the herds. Not far from here, Tarchon and the Tyrrhenians were camped in a safe place, and now all their troops could be seen from the high ground, scattered widely over the fields. End quote. Dionysius of Alexandria says the two groups settled together, which may well be a factor which has led to their conflation over the ages. Quote, the Tyrrhenians are first, and after them are the tribes of the Pelasgians, who once came to the western sea, where they settled with the Tyrrhenian men. End quote. So, to conclude, we have seen in previous videos that the Pelasgians seem to have connections to the ancient sites across Greece. We can also see they have been described as settling on the southern coasts of Italy in regions which became known as Oinotria, a territory which stretched from Paestum to southern Calabria. The land of the Sabines was also described as being settled by the Pelasgians, and they were also described as settling in a region by the Spenetic mouth of the Po River before migrating inland into the land of the Umbrians. They are also described as inhabiting the region near Lake Cutilia, as well as their customs being preserved in the cities of Faleri and Fascenium. In addition to this, they are also connected with the foundations of the city of Pallanteum and Rome, and some authors even also ascribe the origins of the Roman festivals of Saturnalia and Lupercalia to the Pelasgians. In addition to this, they are also credited as being the first people who brought letters to Italy, much like the letters which were brought to the Greeks by Cadmus are described by Diodorus Siculus as being Pelasgian in origin. Finally, the region of Purgi, known for its Etruscan port and religious sanctuary, was also said to have originally been Pelasgian, which may also lend credence to the notion of a connection between the Pelasgians and the Etruscans. We will pick this thread back up again in the next episode, where we will look at the Pelasgians in Asia Minor, as well as the islands of the Aegean. So who were the Pelasgians, and what was their impact on ancient Italy? And are they connected to the Etruscans? Please do let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you all for the support. And as always, I'll catch you on the next one. Old Boy, out.